So another 3 short stories, or 2 short ones, and one slightly longer one. Having talked about all of the great things about co-creation, I wanted to talk about some of the traps that one might fall into. And I talked a little bit about this already, actually, but I think it's quite possible to be co-creative and sustain the current norms, and to maintain or even reinforce the status quo. I also think it's quite possible to be co-creative and to just waste a lot of time and money through conversations that don't really lead anywhere. So for us, social innovation work means bringing together 3 different practices. People power co-creation is one of those, but we also take a systemic view in our work, so that we know that we're addressing sort of root causes of issues, or we're playing a use in the system. We can see the complexity of the situation. And the second part is that we use an innovation process, so that we are learning through doing and learning through experimentation, working at a small scale, prototyping to develop things that work before scaling them. So again, a sort of process that's quite familiar to a lot of the commercial and manufacturing industries, but bringing that and changing it slightly into a social problem-solving space. So I think the question is, when you're doing co-creation, yeah, great, but what kind of co-creation, what kind of process, what other different methodological disciplines are you drawing on for that? So I told you that one was short. The second is about self-determination. And I think when most people talk about co-creation, they're still professionals leading the process. But at that far right-hand side, you can talk about self-determination. Communities are leading the process and bringing in professionals on their terms, should they wish to. So I wanted to talk about 2 projects, long-term projects that we're working on here. One called Our Town in South Australia, that's looking at supporting towns over 10 years. It's philanthropically funded, supporting towns in South Australia to self-determine responses to better mental well-being. And then the other, working predominantly in New South Wales at the moment, is looking at increasing bushfire resilience. So you may know, you may have seen over the in December 2019 and January 2020, we experienced some of the biggest bushfires that we'd ever experienced in Australia. And that obviously has consequences for rebuilding, but particularly people's mental health and resilience in communities. So where that project's looking at how can you use bushfires and the necessary regrowth after bushfires as an opportunity for communities that were already experiencing disadvantage to transform their own futures. I think what's really exciting about both of these projects, and Our Town I'll talk about because that's more advanced, and the year 2020 for Our Town was spent building the capability of 6 towns to do innovation work. So to understand the systemic problem in their communities, and the role TACSI was playing here, and our part Faithful Foundation and Clear Horizon was a bit like the coaches in Family by Family program. We were the professionals supporting the building of capability in communities so that they could then lead their own process. So they did the innovation work, they understood the challenges, they identified the opportunities, and now they've got 10 years of funding to put those opportunities into action. And that funding is only really dependent on them learning. So the communities have been given a lot of control to self-direct their own futures. And I think that's a really exciting way of working. Just flavour of what this looks like in practice. So there was lots of conversations with community members. We supported community members to reach out to bits of their community that weren't represented in community groups, whether that was LGBTIQA people, Aboriginal people, people living with a disability, people living in very isolated places, to ensure that those conversations represented the actual diversity of the community. They opened shop fronts. They put things in shop windows. These are ideas that they're looking to pursue in the supermarket windows. They ran events in the pub, in the local community hall, big discussions. They had events in people's homes to sort through ideas. And now six of those communities have got, four of those communities have got funding for 10 years of work, and two of them for 1 year of work. So it's a really interesting model, I think, and it's one where, yeah, you're really supporting communities to lead the change themselves. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about social R&D ecosystems. And this is an idea that we've been thinking about for some time at TACSI. And I think it's very... I'm thinking about how do we really create the ecosystem so that social innovation can become mainstream. And part of that is co-creation. And you'll see in this story that co-creation and collaborative governance in particular has an important role to play. So I think research and development is all around us. Research and development is why we were able to have a vaccine for COVID in less than 12 months. But it's also embedded into commercial industries like eggs or meat or farming or sheep. We have actually in Australia quite sophisticated approaches around innovation in agriculture as well as science, and I'm sure you do in the Basque Country and Spain as well. But we don't see that kind of rigor applied to social problem solving. It's much more ideological driven. It's much more dispersed. And really, we started to ask ourselves, well, what can we learn from this commercial and scientific innovation systems to bring and ecosystems to bring into social problem solving? So if you're talking about research and development, there's two things you need to think about. One is research and development processes, and there's been some great work around this. Sorry, my slides are all a bit weird. Thinking about social research and development processes in Canada, actually. This is a model of a social research and development process developed by practitioners. But we also have to think about ecosystems, and this is a picture of the American agricultural innovation ecosystem. And you can see that it's got very close connections with universities, with politicians, with industry, and there's lots and lots of different things integrated, but we don't see that in social problem solving. We see a process that's we were going to add the translations for this. We see the process that for that's unfortunate. We see the process for in Australia anyway, where we see failure, a government review of that failure, some kind of reform, and it just completes going through round and around that cycle without any real change. And we've seen 10, 20 years of reforms, tens of billions of dollars spent on issues like child protection without any real change in Australia. And we think there's a better way to do that. At the same time, we see isolated innovation despite unhelpful conditions. So lots and lots of people doing very interesting things at different levels, but not connected up. So what if we built a social R&D ecosystem? What would that look like? So the first thing we did is look at existing commercial and scientific systems and say, well, what are the parts of those? And these are them. So one is workforce. You need people to want to do your work. So if you think about how many young people are excited about the opportunity of being a video games designer, But how many young people are excited at the opportunity of reforming education or prisons or child protection services? So we need to create that excitement as well as build the skills and capabilities and training for people. We need to support the full innovation cycle, so early stage innovation, the discovery process where you're understanding ideas and opportunities, the invention stage where you're creating new ideas, the implementation stage where you're starting to trial those ideas and then spread them as we have family by family. I think very important in research and development ecosystems, and I think particularly social research and development ecosystems, is coordination. So you have incredibly sophisticated ways to coordinate innovation around research and development in the military, for example, DARPA in the US, or innovation in eggs and agriculture in Australia. But we don't have that specifically in the social problem-solving space, certainly not in Australia. And then finally, I talked a little bit about this too. You've got to have good reasons and reward to do social R&D. For many of my colleagues who are innovators in Australia, actually you're not going to get paid more or get more government contracts or even necessarily earn the respect of your colleagues if you do great innovation work. You're more likely, it's actually more in your interest to do what you've always done in most cases. This isn't right. This isn't what we need if we're trying to create some kind of social progress. So these are the elements. I think we can think about what these would look like in a social problem-solving space. But also only doing that would be a really bad thing to do for these reasons. Research and development processes are not designed for the kinds of complex social issues that we're all working on. As I said a little earlier, research and development is designed to meet the needs of paying customers, not beneficiaries, people experiencing social challenges. We've got to deal with the ethics around experimentation on people or with people. We're seeing in a lot of places, and certainly in parts of politics in Australia, where ideology trumps evidence. So what's the point of having an evidence creation system? And there's also good evidence that research and development activities are brilliant at creating futures the public don't want to live in. So if you look at research and development into social media, for example, you see the transformation that has had on young people's mental health and instances of suicide. You can also see at the transformation and the effects that has had on our democracies. Unintended consequences, but still creating and contributing to futures that people generally don't want to see. And another point is that research and development could be a very good way to reinforce dominant culture over marginalised peoples. And a particular concern of ours in Australia is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have been marginalised through colonisation for hundreds of years. And many of them stand to benefit the most from a better, richer social system. So we don't want to reinforce those dynamics. What could answer these concerns? Well, actually, it's a collaborative governance that puts people power at the centre in many of the ways that Alazne and I have been talking about at projects and initiatives, but also in determining things like what kind of future do we want to live in? Very big, bold questions, probably appropriate participatory, deliberative processes. But I think these are the really exciting kinds of conversations you could be having, perhaps you're already having, in the Basque Country as we address the big challenges that you are working on. So if you want to know more about this, there's a report. There's also some patterns that we've identified, practical things that people are doing already that you can copy and combine. And there's lots of it out there. We don't need to start from scratch. It's more about how do we build all of the pieces together. And these are core, I think, the people power patterns. And I'm very excited in things like how can we have great conversations and exciting and imaginative conversations about the future with real people. And also, how could the public and citizens provide governance over research and development activities, social research and development activities? I think that could be a really exciting future and a really advanced form of collaborative governance. So if you wanted to run a test on the ecosystems you're already part of, I think a really good research and development system would accelerate the development of a future the public wants. It would put people experiencing marginalization at the center of decisions, big decisions and small decisions. Not only people experiencing marginalizations, but they would need to be there. It would cultivate imagination, experimentation, rigor, and also generosity. That we've got to learn to share a bit better. And it would build talent and capability, embrace diverse knowledge bases, as you've talked about, generate interest and cultural esteem for social purpose innovation. It would really hold it in high regard. It would further Indigenous self-determination, innovation, and knowledge systems, and ultimately lead to better social, economic, and planetary outcomes. Well, that was a long list. I'll try and summarize all of that in a few points. So I think the kind of questions you could ask yourselves from this and how this connects to your practice are this. What kinds of co-creation processes do you want to run? What other kinds of methodologies might you draw on? What is the role of self-determination in your work, where you're really building the capability of communities to lead things for themselves? I think when you're talking about co-creation and collaborative governance, it's important to ask of what. I think research and development ecosystems are some of the most exciting things because they are really going to lead us to the future. And finally, I think you can also turn that the other way and ask for some of the issues that you've named as being important for your region. What would an R&D ecosystem look like for employment or for climate change or for collaborative governance? What role might Arantzazu Lab play in that? What role might the Basque country play in that? How might you connect more broadly with that ecosystem? And I hope in some way TACSI can be part of that learning journey with you. And just to finish, to say that, just to reinforce, I think, we've got to make the stuff up. I think that's the exciting thing about this work. Learn from, but really how it's combined and how it works for you and your people and your society and in your culture and in your language is all things to be made up. So it's very exciting to be invited in to be part of that journey, and I look forward to learning with Arantzazu Lab and you all over the next few years, hopefully. Yone.
Thank you. Thank you both for the second bit. It's always inspiring to hear the social and the ecosystem reflection that you've been doing, and I know that you're also been doing it with other countries, right? So you've been also experimenting or like reflecting in other countries. So it's always interesting to hear it. I don't know if anyone. We have a couple of minutes. 2 minutu dauzkagu hori atsedenaldia baina.
We've got a couple of minutes before coffee break. It's not a long time. But there is time if anybody wants to ask a quick question, or if anyone wants to share a thought with our colleagues from TACSI before they leave us. Any last thoughts, last comments, or are you all desperate for a cup of coffee?
Second part. I'm going to take it in Basque because I want to ask to you both, but I'm actually a big fan of this slide with the repeat Basque cycle. So I'm going to, spread it with your permission, right? So, but baina galdera bat egin nahi nizuen, ez? Eta eskatuko nizueke Arantzazu Laben izen.
So, I think on behalf of all of us here, and on behalf of Arantzazu Lab, this is a question. Now, Alazne, you know the Basque Country, you know the conditions here, you're familiar with Arantzazu Lab, you know our perspective, you know our objectives. So, as TACSI, as a representatives of TACSI, could you challenge us? Give us a challenge, set us a challenge. Alazne, especially, you know our context, you know what can we do here to get this added value, to try to help us create this ecosystem here. Give us a challenge, set us a challenge. What could we do here? So give us some advice and then set us a challenge.
We would like you to challenge us. How can we add valuable things, a valuable contribution to the R&D ecosystem that we will be very much willing to build together?
Bueno, nik uste dut.
Well, I think you've already started, right? You've started, you've created this space for experimentation. You've got people, citizens involved, and it's open out to society. You want to listen to society, and you're open to that. So I think that you've really made a very good start. It's a fantastic start indeed, I would say. What would I add? Well, from TACSI, perhaps we could, two different perspectives. First of all, it needs to be focused on people, but it needs to be experimental. I know something you talk about as well. And then, do you need to be perhaps systemic? That would be perhaps a challenge, to have a systemic perspective. Now, all of you who are there today, you're all working in the field of creation. You're working towards creating a better society. And this is collaboration that you're initiating now. Hopefully, you can have a more systemic point of view and outlook on all of this.
Chris, do you want to add any other thoughts challenging the Basque country, adding to what Alazne was saying?
I think the challenge in this work is to, I think this work is very interesting, it's very complex, there's lots to talk about and discuss. My challenge to you is to deeply locate yourself in a context, in an issue, and not in the abstract, but in the kind of let's address this particular issue and build through practice, because I think that's what cuts through a lot of the concerns and worries, and everybody that will tell you that this is not possible and we can't do this and it's not in our culture, blah, blah, blah. But I think you can cut through all of that through doing.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I think when we will share later, and we will share with you. I know that it's getting late in Australia, so maybe you don't have the time to stay for longer. But in one of our criteria for the co-creation in ecosystem, that a lot of the people here have mentioned in the interviews, is actually the doing. I think there's a lot of you mentioned in the beginning, Irune, as well. I think here Garasi also mentioned it in the beginning, how we move from this high-level reflection into tangible and the doing. So that will be our challenge as well. So if there's no more comments, we may leave it here, and we are in touch. Thank you, Alazne. Thank you, Chris, for your time. It has been great to hear your presentation. And
Zuei, mila esker.
Thank you all very much.